Okay, well, let me now have the pleasure of introducing the final speaker of our session. Arlyne, I see you there, Arlyne Simon. And what I have officially, it says she's a solutions architect in the Health, Education, and Consumer Industry Group at Intel and founder of Abby Invents LLC. But I believe, Dr. Simon, it's more than that because I had made a little note about biomedical engineer, inventor, author, entrepreneur. And I believe that that is all true. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us and just delighted and just wonderful that you're gonna, be our final speaker. And I think you have a very, very unique perspective that you're going to share with us. Thank you again for being here. I'm just going to turn it over to you. Okay.
Thank you so much for this warm introduction. I'm really happy to be here today. So I'm going to share my screen. So good day, everyone. I am Dr. Arlyne Simon. I am a self-described multi-potentialite, as many of the speakers I heard today, meaning that I have several creative pursuits. I work at Intel in the healthcare group as a biomedical engineer. My formal title is a solutions architect. And in this role, I design new computing solutions that get embedded into medical imaging equipment like ultrasound machines. I'm also an inventor, a children's author, and the founder of Abby Invents, which is a K-5 invention education company. Based on statistics, the likelihood that I would grow up to become an inventor is very small. Strike one, 82% of 40-year-old inventors today are men. Strike two, Caucasians are 3 times as likely to become inventors as Blacks. Strike three, children in the top 1% income households are 10 times as likely to become inventors. No matter what game you're playing, typically 3 strikes, you're out. So 3 strikes, you're out. That would be me. We need diversity in inventing. There are several communities of color, disabled communities, for instance, where there are challenges or problems to solve in our communities that may not be known by the majority. And when we empower kids to see themselves as problem solvers, to see themselves as inventors, we're enabling them to look at, find solutions to come up with, to solve these challenges in their communities. By defying the odds, I did become an inventor, and my journey to innovation went like this. I grew up in a very small island in the Caribbean called Dominica. I moved to the United States for college, so I did my undergrad at Georgia Tech as a chemical engineer. And then I went to University of Michigan to pursue a PhD in macromolecular science and engineering. The photo you see here is a photo of me that was taken the day after I defended my dissertation defense. And you can see that it's very easy to find me in the photo. I am the shortest, I am the only woman, and I am the only Black person in a group of 14. And this is what my lab environment looked like for my final 2 years in graduate school. And would you believe there are still 3 guys who are missing? This team was truly one of the most collaborative teams I worked with, and my PhD advisor, Dr. Shu Takayama, remains one of the best mentors I could have ever had. Dr. Takayama changed my life. He called me into his office one day and said, the work that you're doing, we should file a patent for it. You've invented something and we need to protect it. And I remember sitting, in the chair in his office in utter disbelief, asking, are you sure? I mean, an inventor. At this point in my life, I still thought of an inventor as someone who looks like Albert Einstein, certainly not somebody who looked like me. But he encouraged me to file a patent, and because of him, today I am an inventor. Fast forward to last year, I was one of 120 women in STEM honored with a life-size statue at the Smithsonian Museum and exhibit in Washington, D.C. This was part of the If Then initiative, which is meant to have a cultural shift to show girls that we belong as scientists, engineers, inventors, you name it. And it's the largest ever assembly of women's statues in the US. Because my journey to innovation has been and continues to be remarkable, my personal mission is to inspire kid inventors everywhere. And my method is threefold. I make inventing fun. I enjoy telling kids stories of how I fell in love with science. And one story I love sharing with them is how much I was obsessed with this particular species of caterpillar in Dominica called the frangipani caterpillar. Because this caterpillar is so colorful, I was convinced that it was going to turn into the most beautiful butterfly. And I recount the story of how I studied the metamorphosis of the caterpillar and how disappointed I was when what emerged from the cocoon was actually a brown moth. And the kids laugh uncontrollably as I tell them that story. I make inventing fun by hosting innovation workshops and challenging kids to find problems to solve at home, in schools, in their communities. And they build their invention. For instance, this little inventor that you see here is so proud of her unbreakable crayon. I make inventing relevant. Too often as educators, we introduce students to inventors like Albert Einstein's and the Isaac Newtons, and unintentionally, we make kids see that inventing is something of the past. Or we introduce them to the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks, and kids start thinking that inventors are only white men. By sharing stories of my different things I've worked on as a biomedical engineer, I make inventing relevant. By talking about the blood tests that I invented, how we're able to diagnose patients more faster. Talking about designing syringes and how we're able to deliver drugs to patients more accurately. Or what I do today, designing ultrasound machines and allowing moms and dads to be able to see the first image of their unborn baby. I make inventing magical by writing children's book series featuring a girl inventor named Abby. In every book, Abby invents something that kids wish existed, like unbreakable crayons, and she gets a patent in every book. Through Abby Invents, we create STEM trading cards featuring women in STEM role models. And these women are real life role models. You know, they are trained ballerinas who are also rocket scientists, or they're toy inventors, astrophysicists. They are the inventors of Fortnite, and allow kids to see how inventing and science is really all around us. Because books are windows allowing kids to see themselves in stories, or books are mirrors as well. I collaborated with a few educators to start a free professional development workshop series for K-5 educators called Invention Lit. This program was actually funded by the Lemelson Foundation. And in this program, we have 100 children's books and 100 lesson plans for free for educators. And what these lesson plans and books show is giving teachers a framework that they can use in their classrooms to bring invention education to their classroom using any children's book. Books like Cinderella and Rapunzel and The Hungry Caterpillar, books that have nothing on the face value to do with science or inventing, but we show them how they can be comfortable with bringing inventing to the classroom. Technologies are typically brought to the market through a technology push or a market pull. With a technology push, we create a technology and then later we find a market opportunity for it. In a market pull scenario, we may first identify an unmet market need or a customer need, and then we create a technology specifically targeting that solution. My invention in graduate school is very much a technology push, but when I share the story with you today, I'm going to frame it like a market pull. Cancer patients typically undergo chemotherapy, and chemotherapy kills the cancer cells, yes, but it also may kill healthy cells as well. When this happens, the physician may then recommend to the patient that they get a bone marrow transplant. That way, the healthy cells can be replenished. The challenge is if the patient gets a bone marrow transplant from a donor, something happens in the body where the donor bone marrow transplant may actually reject the patient's body. And then the patient now has a disease called graft versus host disease. The symptoms for that disease are usually skin rashes and other types of symptoms. And typically how doctors diagnose this is through an invasive biopsy. So our solution, or the technology that we created, was a blood test that is able to accurately detect and quantify the levels of protein biomarkers that are elevated in the bloodstream when a patient has that rejection going on, where the bone marrow transplant is actually rejecting the patient's body. And our test was able to detect, okay, this person has graft versus host disease versus this person is healthy. And because of this work, I was able to be one of the inaugural, one of the first cohorts of the NSF I-Corps program. We were able to be challenged and get out of the building. That's part of the NSF I-Corps phrase, get out of the building and talk to at least 100 people in your ecosystem, which we did. And we felt compelled that, this technology was worth bringing to the market. So we started a company called Phasic, and we got the NSF SBIR Phase 1 and Phase 2 grant. Now, I did say that this was a technology push, which it was, because we had already developed the micropatterning technology. We knew we could detect these biomarkers, but we didn't know what we could use it for until a chance meeting with a clinical researcher at the university who is an MD PhD, and she does treat patients who have graft versus host disease. And she started talking about her pain point. And partnering that with the NSF I-Corps program of really listening to your customers was how we were able to come up with, using this technology for graft versus host disease. Ultimately, Phasic closed its doors after 5 years, but the lessons I learned from this experience were invaluable. One of the reasons that we closed our doors was bringing a diagnostic test to market is very challenging. And even if we changed the framework of this technology to be more of a research-only technology, the market for immunoassays is very saturated. But the lessons continue, and you'll see. I leveraged the skill set from NSF I-Corps, and I brought that with me to corporate America. And we were in one particular role in a Fortune 500 medical device company. We were aware that the FDA was receiving a lot of complaints or alarms that, nurses in the field, they were using syringes and infusing drugs into patients, particularly neonatals, for instance, at very low rates. But their challenge was that there was lots of under infusions, meaning that the patients are not getting how much drugs that they need, or over infusions, they were getting too much. So a simple analogy would be you trying to take just a droplet of water from your kitchen faucet, and maybe you're opening the faucet very slowly, but then, the pipe chokes and all this water bursts out, so now you have an over infusion. We wanted to understand why this was happening. We know the design constraints for syringes, we know the inner diameters, we know how syringe pumps are made. And one of the challenges in the industry is that the manufacturers who make the syringes are not the same manufacturers who make syringe pumps. So we then get out of the building, like the NSF I-Corps said, and visited hospitals to observe how nurses, what is their workflow? What size syringe they typically gravitate towards. And we observed that nurses, irrespective of how much drug they have to infuse into a patient, they seem to gravitate to the very large syringe sizes, 50 ml. And as engineers, when we create these products, we assume that our end users, the physicians or the nurses, are going to use a large syringe if you're going to infuse a large volume of drug, a small syringe if you're going to infuse a small volume of drug. But that's not what was happening. Perhaps it was habit. And what that meant was we were now able to write guidelines in regulatory bodies through the ISO International Standard Organization, where we specified minimum allowable flow rates for different syringe sizes. And we could specify that if you're using a syringe that's 50 ml, you can only do so if it's 1 ml per hour or larger. And because syringe pump manufacturers are different sometimes from syringe manufacturers, this guideline now allows this to be an input for those who design infusion pumps. And now their software developers are able to write simple code within their syringe infusion pumps that would prevent, for instance, if a nurse now wants to put a 50 ml syringe and deliver 0.06 ml per hour, the syringe infusion pump would alarm and she would not be able to actually deliver any drug to the patient. and she would be forced to grab a smaller size syringe. That way, we're ensuring that the right amount of drug is delivered to the right patient at the right time. I wanted to take this a step further, what I learned from NSF I-Corps. What we learned from the program was to pivot if something doesn't work, or listen to your customers. I didn't think that students need to wait until they're in their 20s or 30s to know that they could be inventors. Students today should learn from a very young age. And so that's when I started writing the Abby Invents picture book series. Abby means gives joy, invents means to discover. So Abby Invents means that there is joy in discovery. When kids read Abby Invents on Baker Blue crayons, they relate to Abby's frustrations because they know what it feels like to color and then my crayons break. Now they know that they can be problem solvers and solve this problem. And teachers leverage the story and they make learning fun, which is one of my values of making learning fun. So they read the story, they invite their kids to design and make their own unbreakable crayons. And just like the story where Abby's teacher drives over Abby's crayons with a school bus to test the strength of her crayon, this teacher had her students put their crayons on the ground and she drove her car over it to see how strong their unbreakable crayons were. And to her astonishment, and certainly mine, the students' crayons all passed the strength test. Let's look at Abby Invents the Foldybot. I wanted to introduce students to the engineering design process. With I-Corps, it's all about listening to your customers. And just as their washing machines to wash clothes, their dryers to dry the clothes. As a child, maybe you're wondering, my mom is taking forever to fold clothes. Why are there no folding machines? But first, before you just jump into inventing, we must first make sure that this is really a market need. And so Abby Invents invites students to ask questions and ask your friends and your neighbors, do you like folding clothes? Now let's imagine what a folding machine would look like. Just as washing machines turn dirty clothes into clean clothes and dryers turn wet clothes into dry clothes, how can you turn unfolded clothes into folded clothes? They plan out their experiments, they create, they draw, they test the prototypes, but nothing ever works the first time. And just as engineers, how we draw inspiration from everyday items around us, I invite students to draw inspirations just from an everyday click pen. And it's always fascinating to me to see kids now trying to break apart their parents' pens to really see the spring mechanism. And it shows them that you can draw inspiration from everyday items. When you click a pen, the tip goes out, you click it again, the tip goes in. Instead of folding clothes the traditional way, can we instead roll a clothes over a tip? And just as again with the NSF I-Corps, when you create a program, when you create a new product, you go back and you ask your customers, hey, did I actually solve the problem that we were trying to solve? In engineering or in corporate America, we call this step customer validation. And kids are introduced to patenting. In patenting, you have 3 criteria. Is something novel? But for kids, is it the first of its kind? Is it useful? Are you actually solving a problem that the world needs? Is it non-obvious? For kid language, is it easy to guess how you made it? And now what can you do? You can patent it. Albert Einstein says that education is not learning of the facts, but the training of the mind to think. And I hope that you join me in my journey of inspiring kid inventors everywhere and making inventing fun, relevant, and magical. And I'm super grateful for having participated in the NSF I-Corps program because the skill sets I learned from this program, I still take with me today. As I mentioned, I work at Intel designing ultrasound machines, and all the conversations that we have with customers, it's all about how do you design these questions to not lead the customer in the technologies that you have today, but how do you really understand their pain points to bring solutions that the market needs? So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. This was wonderful and very entertaining too. You have to let us know how we can link in. In my case, I have some grandchildren that I want to make sure they discover your books. Okay, but Arlyne, you jumped us from your childhood or growing up in Dominica to going to Georgia Tech, right? Is there something you can fill in on that? When you grew up, that might have motivated you to think along these terms, or did I miss something there?
Absolutely. My dad is a civil engineer, and growing up, I always loved chemistry. So my intent was really to be a chemistry teacher. That's what I thought I was going to grow up to be. And then when I came to the US and I joined the chemistry club, there was a chemical engineer who spoke at our club, and he made chemical engineering seem like this amazing career that you could work in cosmetics, you could work in the pharmaceutical industry, you could work in automotive. And as a young undergrad, I figured, just in case I choose the wrong degree, it would be nice that I can switch jobs that often as this chemical engineer. And so that's why I chose to become a chemical engineer.
That's great. But you had fortunately you had a role model too, right? At a young
Yes,
age, right?
I
Well,
did.
that's wonderful. So, well, thank you again. Thank you very, very much.